I never know if this thing's pointing at me or my head. My bald spot. But anyway, this is the BSA A65 Lightning. I had a name for it, I can't think what it was now. The If Project. That was it. The If Project. From, of course, the famous Lindsay Anderson film entitled If, where Malcolm McDowell steals a I think it's actually a 68 Lightning, which is slightly different shocks, different front brake, but pretty much the same bike. Actually, today's little talk is about homemade tools, among other things. You have to make a lot of stuff. I don't have it with me, unfortunately, but there's one tool that I could have really done with. But anyway, I'm going to show you what I've done. The first thing, well actually first of all I'm going to show you this shock absorber. I took the shocks apart because I wondered whether I could actually reclaim them, and I made this. I do have a proper, again in Canada, I have a proper release tool that I made actually from a bearing that sits on there. It's actually a lot like the factory tool that has a screw. So there's a collar that sits on there, and the screw basically it pulls on here and pushes that down. But of course I don't have that here, so I improvised. It works. It's probably scary, but it works. And then you see here I can take these collets out. Well, at least that one's rusted in, but you can take it out. There we go. So now, if I release those little hose clamps, or Jubilee clips as they call them in England, I can actually take this apart. I wasn't sure about these shocks because, well, this one doesn't actually leak, and the shaft is in good condition, as you can see from there. So it's actually quite serviceable, and it's got good damping. They look grungy, and you can see on there how the chrome has actually come off. I could reclaim them. I don't know. I mean, as I say, this is supposed to be an oily rag restoration, but yeah, I mean, I decided. I think I'm probably going to buy some actually, because they're not massively expensive. Maybe I'll keep these. I mean, I have actually rejuvenated these. I've wire brushed them, painted them, made them look pretty new. This is a bit of a headache, but you know what? Even if you do that, their life's limited because they're so old now that by the time you start using them again, they'll probably wear out quite quickly. So I'm probably going to just take them. I don't know, just keep them as backup spare parts. I've actually lost one of the collets anyway off the other shock. I don't know what I do with it. Been looking all over the bench for it and I can't find it. So there's those. I mean, that's a tool if you like. If you're prepared to be adaptable and use your loaf, it's amazing what you can make to do stuff. The other tool that I made, because I made this. This is actually from it's a big washer. I don't even know what size that washer is, but I had to get the stud strap plug out, which is this beastie here, which fits in. I'll close this door. Which normally fits in there. It screws in, and you have to drill out the little where it's been hit with the sand punch to kind of lock it in. You have to drill those out because otherwise it won't move. This one was actually quite tight. I wrecked a couple of things before I managed to. This is actually just a nice hard steel washer. I had to grind it down a bit. I bought myself a grinder. That's another tool that I didn't have with me. Anyway, I got that out, and of course one of the flywheel bolts. If you take all three off, you can actually take the flywheel off. But I've never seen much point in doing that, unless you really want to clean it up. I don't know. There's one there. So this is another tool. This is for taking out the stud strap, the tube. Now I have a 12mm tap in Canada at home with a nut that's on it, nut and a washer, and I normally just screw the tap into the stud strap, just so it bites into it, not massively, but just enough to grip it, and then spinning the nut, you use the tap to extract the stud strap. But I made this, I didn't have a tap here, so I made this instead. I don't even know what this is. It's a turnbuckle or something. It had a big hook on the end, and I cut it off and then basically reground it, and then it actually fits in. Here's the stud strap, it's the tube itself, because this has to come out. So I was able to, I don't know how I can do this one-handed. I was able to, and actually you can see on there, you can see the sludge that was on there as well. So I was able to put this in inside the stud strap, and then that little peg just fits in the hole there. It's difficult to do this one-handed, but it did. It gripped in beautifully, actually. There. So you can see how that's actually gripped in there, and then I just use that little nut on the washer, and it just pulls out. And as you can see, there is sludge on there, which is what they're for. It's not terrible. I've seen a lot worse. It wasn't packed inside. I've seen them absolutely packed inside as well. But this one actually isn't too bad. I think somebody cleaned it out. But this is interesting because this crank has been reground. It's 40 thou under. It's got new rod bearings, and the rods are on it. And I think what they've done is they reground it, and I don't know whether I've tried to have a look inside there, but I can't. I mean, there is sludge in there. There's a lot of sludge in there. I think what they did without taking this out is they cleaned the centre, which I've seen before. But just imagine this: you've just reground this crank with carborundum stones. So you've got a lot of material that's probably floating around inside there. You put the rod bearings on, and then you partially clean it out. What's going to happen, of course, is that residual carborundum powder is going to come out and just destroy the rod bearings. I've seen it happen. I saw it oddly enough, on a Reliant three-wheeler car. Somebody had reground the crank and not cleaned it, and it destroyed the rod bearings in about, I think it was less than 1,500 miles. They were absolutely done. They were toast. So it's very important. So what I'm going to do here is I haven't bought one yet, but I'm going to buy a pump, like a typical sort of diesel fuel pump, electric, and I'm going to fill up a kerosene. I've got a kerosene jug here, so I'm basically going to recirculate kerosene through this. I'm going to polish these first of all. I always find that if you polish those, and you polish that, like so to mirror finish, and actually I use Solvol for that. And I've heard people jump up and down and say, "Oh, that's a very abrasive." Well, yeah, it is. That's the polish. But then so are carborundum stones. So there's any number of machining methods in engineering. You just have to make sure it's clean afterwards. So I'm going to polish these, mirror finish. The conrods, I'm going to get them sized, which means that basically what they do is they machine off a little tiny bit of material off the end cap, both, and then they run a milling machine through the centre to make sure it's absolutely perfectly circular, because rod bearings go slightly oval over a period of time, which is understandable because of course they're pulling and pushing all the time. It's not side to side, so that like everything else they wear. So if you redo them, then they're as good as new, and you've got almost a perfect machine, perfect tolerance fit. If you polish those up, machine the rods, put everything together, after you've cleaned everything absolutely thoroughly, and as I say, I normally circulate kerosene through these, and then what I do is I circulate a little bit of isopropyl alcohol through it, so it's absolutely clean, and then blow it out with compressed air, and that usually does it. And my last two A65s, I think I keep going on about this, but even with the standard, Series 2 style pump, up to 66 they fitted an old pump, which wasn't that great. The second one they fitted, they're both made of what's called pot metal. It was a kind of a cheap metal that was produced in the war. It's actually not bad material for things like pumps. It's got good heat dissipation, it's very good bearing surfaces, but they're not great pumps. The second one's better. The last one, which they fitted to the oil and frame Thunderbolt A65s, was the best of the lot. It's cast iron. That was a good pump, and it had a bigger impeller diameter, I believe. But you know what? On my last two A65s, which were both the same year as this one, I put those pumps back in with everything cleaned up and polished and God knows what. And my last one, I actually fitted an oil pressure gauge to it, and it would not drop below 30 psi, or even on a stinking hot day at idle. And when it was running, it was up to 70. And what I had to do, and I made a video about it, is I had to, I don't know if you can see in there, that's the pressure release valve housing. I had to kind of go into an angle there. I fit the crank cases in the frame, and then I drilled into an angle, and then put a 1/8 MPT tap through there, and put a fitting in there, and ran it up to a gauge, which I personally think is the most important thing you can do to an A65, because the oil pressure is everything on these. If you don't have oil pressure, you're done. What happens a lot on the old ones is, I think people mistakenly replace the pump thinking, well, that's the problem. That's why it's got low oil pressure. So they replace the pump, and they think that'll cure it. But the reason they've got low oil pressure is because they're just tired, they're worn. You know, I'm not saying a new pump's not a bad thing, it's actually a good thing. It can only do good, but it won't fix the problem. And if you have wear here, you'll lose oil pressure there. Oil will come spewing because it's pumped through from the crankcase. It's pumped through to here, and then there's a hole here somewhere. There. I don't know if you can see it. I'm going to shine a flashlight on it. There's a hole there. That is what feeds oil through into the journals. So if you're losing oil pressure here, then there's less oil to go through to these big ends. That's what they're called. So often I've seen on A65s is what happens is it's this one that breaks. This is the one that, because this is getting just enough oil, this is not getting enough oil at all. So they'll often seize there, and often they'll break the rods. So it stands to reason that if you've got perfect bearing surfaces and you've got very fine tolerances, you're not going to lose oil pressure. You just won't. And even with a crappy pump, it'll work well. I mean, a good pump is good peace of mind. I'm going to use mine because it's only done 15,000 miles and it seems to work perfectly. So, and it is the second. It's the last of the pot metal ones. So I'm going to use it for now. I might change it in the future. I'm going to see how it performs. I think that's the best way. If the oil pressure is good, then I shall leave it. And I've read that they can warp. I don't actually believe it. I've never known die-cast or alloy or pot metal castings to twist and warp. I think that's nonsense. They have better heat dissipation than cast iron. Cast iron's more likely to warp, I would have thought. I don't know. But it seems like a bit of urban myth to me. And as I say, I can only talk from practical experience. And I've ridden A65s long and hard, and I've never managed to lose oil pressure from a warped pump. I think it's not. I'll tell you what I have found. I found the aftermarket gaskets that you buy for the pumps that were often misaligned. The holes are misaligned. And that's something you have to really watch out for. And I rebuilt an A65 many years ago where somebody put silicone all over the gasket, and of course it got lodged in the oilways, which is a disaster. That's not you should never use any kind of gasket material at all on the oil pump gasket. Usually what I do is I'll soak it in water and then dry it with some paper towel and then put it in position, and that's the best way of all. That's the old-fashioned way of putting gaskets on. That's what Harley Davidson used to do on their very, very old models. So there's that. Oh, I made this tool as well. This is a locking mechanism. This is for when you're trying to do up the clutch hub nut. So that locks this part here with the clutch basket. So all you have to do is lock the clutch basket, and then you can put some torque on the nut. And I think that's probably about it for all the little bits and pieces of tools here. As I say, you can actually see on here. You can see the sludge on that little sludge strap, which is what they're designed for. And this brings me to another subject. Actually, a lot of people swear by these old-fashioned oils. You know, straight 40. You know, there's different brands. They all sound sort of quaint and old-fashioned, nice names, but they're non-detergent oils. And you actually need a detergent oil in an engine, which is why Triumph and BSA specified it, to get rid of deposits of oil. Diesels are terrible. That's why they put so much detergent in diesel engines to stop the build-up, of residue on the inside of the engine. Detergent oils are actually critical, and if you don't use a detergent oil, that's typical of what happens. You get more sludge build-up. And I think there's always endless arguments on forums, Facebook forums, about what type of oil should I use for my Triumph T120 or for my BSA 65 or Norton Commander, and the answer is what the manufacturers tell you to use, which in this case is 2050. Originally it was SAE 40, but then they decided that 2050 was better, which it is. It stands to reason. It's like the points or the contact breaker setup versus the boiler setup. Which is better? You can go with the contact breaker setup. It works. I actually quite like them, but the boiler's better. It's that simple. It's technology. Modern oil is better for an engine than older oil. And there's all sorts of ridiculous claims about rollers skimming over the surface of modern multigrades and stuff like that. If it's motorcycle oil and it's a 2050 multigrade, it's perfectly suited for this job. It's what it's built for. And it's got a, with an air-cooled engine, you have such a wide temperature variation in use because it's not water-cooled. There's no consistency. You need an oil that can adapt, and the whole idea of 2050, for one thing, is that it behaves like a 20 weight at low temperatures, and it behaves like a 50 weight at high temperatures, which is exactly what you want. If you have a monograde, SA30, SA40, that's what it is, hot or cold, and it's thickish when it's cold, and it's thin when it's hot. So a multigrade 2050 for a British twin is essential. People will disagree with me, I know, but I have a Triumph T140 that's got, I think it's the highest mileage T140 in existence. It's got 98,000 miles on the clock now. And I've only ever used multigrades. I put nearly 50,000 on it. I replaced the speedometer, I still have the old one to prove the mileage. And that engine is as sweet as a nut. The other thing I did, and I think this is very important, is I added an inline filter, because on these, what you've got is this is your oil filter, which is garbage really, basically. That's your oil filter. It's just a fine wire mesh, and it'll sift out big lumps, but it won't sift out tiny deposits of silicon, anything that's abrasive. Whereas a proper oil filter will. So I always fit an inline oil filter, and I think it absolutely saves these engines. It's what you want. You don't want any particulates floating around the oil that can get through the mesh. The sump plug is the same. There's a big square plate underneath the engine, right underneath here, that has a mesh filter. And in the case of this one, it collected all the bits that came off the old connecting rod. That was wearing away because the bearings had gone. But it didn't get rid of the stuff that caused it in the first place, is my thinking. So if you have oil or oil with bits in it, you need a good oil filter to get it out. I have clean oil. Say my T140, 97,000 miles, still runs like a top, still amazing oil pressure. I replaced the oil seal on the timing cover a couple of times. It's the only thing that's worn out on it, really. When I noticed the oil light flickering at idle, I pop the oil seal out and replace it. Bingo, fixed again. Doesn't even come on unless you stop the engine, no matter what the heat. And I've ridden that bike in 110 degree heat. And yeah, it's the only way to go. Is a decent oil filter, nice clean engine, good tolerances. You can't go wrong. So that's basically it for now. I don't think I can. I've got the old Amel monoblocks there, which I actually really like. I think these are amazing. They're so much better than the concentrics, apart from anything else, because you can get them apart. The whole jet block, everything. The slide assembly right down the side there. I'll show you that. Do it. All comes out. This is what I love about this bike. Look, all these old fittings. It's the old brass splitter for the choke cable. And it's the same. Oh, the throttle cable's got a twin pole throttle cable. So yeah, that's the BSA 65 so far. As I said, the frame's still the same. I'm going to have to do a lot of wire brushing. I've bought a grinder now. I'm going to buy a wire brush attachment for the grinder. So the frame, combination of paint stripper and an angle grinder with a wire brush, is going to be my version of sandblasting. I have sandblasted them, and it's obviously preferable. It's much nicer, but I don't have that facility here. I'm on an island. I don't even know there's anyone here that can do sandblasting. So I'm going to do it the old-fashioned way with paint stripper and a wire brush and clean things up. As you can see, these wheels. I don't think I've shown this, but absolutely. This is a bike I think that must have been kept in a wet shed for many years. It hasn't been on the road since the late 80s. I know that. But yeah. But anyway, yeah. Fate saved it from fate worse than death, because I said the rods are back on here with the bearings in, and I thought I'll just take them off and check the suds check before I run it. The bearings actually look alright. They've got the tiniest bit of scuffing on them, because I guess they've been put on and the rods have been turned, but I think I'm going to use them because actually they're pretty clean, and I think if everything else is cleaned up nicely. I don't know. Again, I'm contemplating, because it is a major rebuild if it goes wrong. I don't like using bearings that have the slightest marks on them, But they look pretty good. You know, the ones that, I think there's two halves that are perfect, and there's two halves that have slight scuff marks on them, and I'm going to use this on the lower side of the connecting rod, the non-pressure side, so I'm hoping that I'll save it, but if I can get some, I probably will. They're 40 thou size, and they seem to be a little bit harder to get than the standard ones for some reason. Standard bore on this, which is actually amazing. I can't quite believe it. It had 3 pistons that came with little bits, and this is an old one, I've never seen one of these. It's got these little cutaways just down below the old control room. The newer ones I have don't have those, so they're actually, I say newer, they're the ones that came with the bike. 67, this is probably from a very early 60s, A65. And yeah, my other ones too, they're recessed just here. So that's an old piston. And actually, if you run the oil control ring around the groove, it actually jams around here. So I think this piston's done. I think it's actually suffered some warpage. So there we go. That's the end of another episode of the If project. I'm hoping to get a bit more done. I've been ordering bits and pieces. I want this to be an oily rag restoration, as I said. But the more I think about it, the more I think I'm going to put some money into it. I'll use the chain guard again. That, I might actually re-chrome that. I'm still not sure what to do about the tank, because the tank's actually solid. It's just not very pretty. I think I'm probably going to use it, and if I have to, I'll get some of this amazing product called Easy Chrome, which actually looks almost indistinguishable apparently, so I'm told from YouTube clips. So I'll try it. These are done, that's done. So two new silencers for it for sure. So yeah, I want this bike to be quite pretty, not necessarily pristine, but pretty. You know, it's an original bike. There's not a single stripped thread on it anywhere. All the original bolts there. I've cleaned up all the bolts, by the way. Where did I put them? Yeah, everything, all the fasteners. I spent hours on the bench grinder there cleaning everything up because I want to use all the original stuff if I possibly can. There's one there that, you know, they're not perfect, but most of them are actually perfectly okay to use. And yeah, I'm going to polish these up too. So it'll look pretty. I'm going to paint this, polish that up. I cleaned up I'll clean all the valve rockers, the whole, you know, because they need cleaning through as well. They can get sludge inside them. Cleanliness is the key. Cleanliness and preparation is the key. You got a really clean engine with good fresh oil, with all the tolerances nice and tolerant. No, not tolerant. As close to spec as possible. You can't go wrong. These things will go for a long time. A65 engines are actually very tough, despite the urban myth about the timing side main bearing failing. As long as they've got clean oil and they're not thrashed within an inch of their lives, they're actually pretty good. I noticed on this one, I think I mentioned this last time, there's supposed to be a radius on here. And there is, sort of, but I'm not wild about that, actually. I think when they ground it too far down. They should have left a bit more of a radius on it, which I don't like, because I've had one crack right through before. My friend's bike, it actually broke right off. So, the whole journal assembly. What can I do? It's the alternative is a new crank. I mean, I think it'll be, for what I'm going to be using it for. I'm not going to be doing circuit racing or high speeds on the motor. This is going to be a bimbling around the country lanes bike. And I think as long as it's treated gently, I think it should be fine for that. The crank actually otherwise looks pretty clean, so you know, it's been well ground by the look of it, so I'll leave it at that. Anyway, thanks for watching. I'm rabbiting on here, so I shall stop.